So cordial and generous reception of or disposition toward guests. So we've all been guests and we've all had guests, I believe. And so we've had very good experience. One of the comments that came out on Google Sheets was the first time they visited Cross Point, they were welcomed, they were invited to someone's house. Fellowship was great. They were included in the conversation, and the food was great as well. And I'd love to hear that because hospitality is such a necessary component of church life. And you have it here. We have it here. And I'm so grateful for that. So we'll get into the discussion here. We hope to, these Sunday school times are notoriously, they tend to feel notoriously short, like Myron was talking about. And so I'm going to be, I'll watch the clock, and but we hope to leave time at the end for some questions or comments from you. So be thinking about that. And maybe something will be said today that will bring a memory up. I have a few, mostly good. So we're not looking for one-word answers. Like if I ask a question, we're not looking for we want a story, okay? And I know that takes a little bit longer, but that's what helps make it good, I think. And I'll just get just a couple of foundational scriptures. So this is about hospitality. It's a hospitality panel discussion, but I think that it would be good in this setting to call it Christian hospitality, because that's what we're looking at. And so it's all based on Scripture. Romans 12:13, contribute to the needs of the saints. Now, you could say that, okay, that's apparently just limited to the saints, but it's not. It includes the saints, but not limited to. And it finishes by saying, and seek to show hospitality. Now, if you look up the word hospitality in the Hebrew, it means to love the stranger. So you could read this verse, contribute to the needs of the saints and love the stranger. Okay? Hebrews 13:2, do not neglect to show hospitality to strangers. That's a negative way of saying show hospitality to strangers. And I like that. For it finishes, for thereby some have entertained angels unawares. Isn't that exciting to think about? I mean, hospitality, it goes so much farther than church life, so much farther than inviting people to your house or being invited to somebody's house. It involves helping people on the street, for example. And hopefully we'll get some stories from all of that. And 1 Peter 4:9 is an interesting one. It says, show hospitality to one another. What are the next two words? Without grumbling. Ouch. So the question comes to me, is hospitality, do we have to fight that off of our brain? Is hospitality something that often comes with grumbling? So if you all have any thoughts on that, maybe you can include that in your stories. Then, of course, Jesus said, or will say, I was hungry, you gave me food. I was thirsty, you gave me drink. I was a stranger, you welcomed me in. And then, of course, as you did it to the least of these, you did it for me. And, of course, the parable of the Good Samaritan is a very well-known story, probably one of the best hospitality stories in the New Testament. Let's get into this. Paul. To whom should hospitality be shown? Is hospitality a suggestion or a mandate for the Christian? And I'm going to have you include one of the questions that came out on Google Sheets was, is this a gift of the Spirit, or is it meant for everyone? And then explain, consider how it is also important in evangelism and discipleship.
Okay, I have a question. The last part, the last question. I actually have been charged with 3 questions on one.
Yeah, you have.
Can the last one be incorporated in question number 7, where Trevor is sharing about the mission?
I like that. Actually. Yeah.
I have some thoughts on that, but I'd like to incorporate it with Trevor's thoughts on that one, if we could.
Good.
Okay, the first question, to whom should hospitality be shown? Marvin has already alluded to the scriptures here. In Romans 12:13, it says, "Contribute to the needs of the saints and seek to show hospitality." And also in 1 Peter 4:9, "Show hospitality to one another without grumbling." It's a little difficult right now to come up with a story on those two. But that's speaking to the church, to Christians. But then if you go to Hebrews 13, it says, "Do not neglect to show hospitality to strangers," and that is speaking to whoever. So according to that, hospitality should be shown to everyone. And hospitality is so much more than just inviting somebody to your house for a meal. Hospitality is actually, for the Christian, a way of life. It includes kindness, mercy, love, the fruit of the Spirit. It's included in all of those. So hospitality is something to be shown to all men, to all people. It's not just exclusively in the congregation here. In most congregations, we have hosts assigned. It's more than just hosting the people when you're assigned to have the guests. Hospitality is actually a way of life, from what I'm seeing. On the account of Abraham, there in Genesis, when he entertained strangers, when those three men came to him, and if you want to go back, we won't take time to read that in Genesis 18, but he entertained strangers. I really believe he recognized who they were, but really he didn't know. So he took them into his house, and it was more than just opening a can of soup for what he did. It was major. So hospitality is shown to all mankind, to everybody. And it's on the workplace, wherever you go. Hospitality is a part of our life. Okay, the next part is hospitality a suggestion or a mandate or a command? Well, according to the scriptures that we just read, hospitality is something that we practice. God practiced hospitality to all mankind. He knew it was a risk when he created the world and put man into it to take charge of it. But he took that risk, and he gave mankind charge of it, but man failed. So hospitality is something that God does. Jesus did it. And so hospitality is a command. It's not something, it's not really an option. And and you told me to address the question that came in about, is it a gift? Yes, it is. I think the other thing we want to consider is it comes easier for some than for others. For us men, hospitality is really easy. We're happy to invite guests to our house, but then we're not the ones that need to make the preparation for it. But yes, in 1 Corinthians 12:28, when it lists the gifts, it gives the gift of helps, which is the gift of showing mercy, of helping as needed. And then also in Romans 12:8, we have the gift of mercy, which is part of hospitality. So actually, it is a spiritual gift. It's a gift that it comes, like I said, more natural for some than others, but it's also a gift to be exercised. Like I said, it's easier for some than for others, but yes, we still need to exercise and practice it because it is a gift, and I think we need to exercise it. Paul said to Timothy that we should not neglect the gifts that we have. So we need to exercise and to seek after it. Actually, it says, I think in 1 Corinthians 12, it says that we should pursue after the gifts. So it's not something to neglect, but it's something to practice. And it will become better and easier as we practice the gift.
Well done. Thank you for that. Yeah, you touched on a couple of things there that have been going through my mind. I grew up in a home where my father was very outgoing, and he was a minister, and he just wanted to invite everyone, and he did often. And I often heard my mom maybe touch on that grumbling part a little bit. But I would say if you're a man who just invites people without consulting your wife, stop it. Okay, let's go on. I'm not going to assign this to anyone, but give a personal story where you experienced great or not so great hospitality, and what stood out to you about the experience. May I start? We were out of state, and for a funeral of a close relative, and we stayed at someone's friend's house that we'd known for a long time. It was in the winter, and the first clue was we were welcomed there. No issue there. But we were brought into the kitchen, and all of the doorways going from the kitchen, as I recall, this is some years ago, had plastic over them. That was your first clue. And so when it came time to go to bed, they ushered us upstairs. It was so cold up there. We had 5 layers of covers on our beds, and one person alone would have been very, very uncomfortable under those 5 layers. Yeah, but fortunately there was both of us, and so it's not just, and I will say this too, if you have a guest room or with a guest bathroom, go ahead and take a shower in there every once in a while, just to to see what it's like for your guests. We stayed at a place one time where the shower head was so high up that, as for a lady, if you didn't intend to wash your hair, you had no choice. You were going to wash your hair, right? Because you couldn't touch it. You couldn't do anything to shut it off. And so I actually went to Lowe's the next day and bought stuff that I needed to turn that into a handheld shower anyway, so much for that. But any one of you, give me your stories.
One of the things that comes to mind for me, the times where I've experienced some of the greatest hospitality that's touched me the most, is often with people who have had the least. Thinking back to when I was at IGO on a ministry trip to Jordan, we would go around and visit different refugees that had just gotten their papers. They were able to leave camp and use what money they had left over to buy an apartment. And so we would go into these bare rooms and only blankets on the floor for furniture. And these people were so happy to welcome us into their home. And they would bring out all kinds of food and constantly filling our cup with coffee and tea. And we would look at each other, we'd feel bad eating this food because we knew they didn't have much. And oftentimes these were families with a lot of kids as well. But yeah, that stuck out to me. And it wasn't the food that stood out, although often the food was really good. It was the kindness and joy that they had, the expression on their faces, just being able to share with us what they had in spite of their circumstances.
Good. Maureen?
We missed the round robin. We were supposed to all say one word.
We did miss the round robin, didn't we?
What hospitality means. For me, it is generosity. I think true hospitality comes out of a heart of generosity, and it's a feeling. For me, it's a feeling that I get from someone if I go into their home, or a feeling how I want my guests to feel when they come to my home. A little story, we were young married. I'm going to say probably 2 months married. And we went on chorus tour down to Georgia. And the couple that we stayed with, she knew that we were young married. And so when we got there, she welcomed us in. And then she took us in, showed us where we are sleeping, and she had a table set up with a whole glass of Southern tea, just for Mark and I. And I'm like, wow! Like it was a feeling that I got that we were wanted there, and that she was glad to have us there. And I'll never forget that.
Okay, thanks for that reminder. So let's do the round robin thing, starting with you, Sherry, and just give us one word, or one sentence rather. What does hospitality mean to you?
I think for me, it's making people feel that they belong.
Yeah, kind of the same. Just giving people a sense of you're being seen and heard and loved. And I love what Rainey said about it's how you feel, make people feel.
Yeah, kind of along the same lines. Taking time to make people feel welcome and cared for in a loving, warm, and genuine way.
It's not quite fair, but if you have been studying this, you have more thoughts about it. But it's actually hospitality is offering community to those who are not privileged to have it.
For me, I grew up in a home that my mom was okay with inviting guests over, even at times when she wasn't fully prepared. But she'd often say that it's not what you do or how your house looks, it's about how you make them feel when they're there. And so that's something that I remember or I think back to often.
One statement I heard was, hospitality is making people feel at home when you really wish they were. But that's, okay. So Maureen, what are some obstacles that may hinder someone from hosting or showing hospitality, and how does one overcome those obstacles? And then after she's done, we'll open it up to any of you that might have something on that subject.
Well, I can only speak for myself, so this probably varies for every person here. There's a difference for everybody. For me, I instantly go to the practical side of like, well, there's no food. Like, what are we going to serve them? This is when we're inviting company to our house for a meal, not necessarily hosting them for the night. I feel like there's a difference there. So if we just have company over, for Sunday lunch, let's take an evening, Sunday evening. My first thought would be, well, what am I going to fix? Like, do I have food for them? Is my house a mess? An obstacle sometimes is just downright tiredness. Like, I don't have the emotional capacity to make someone feel at home or welcome. And I think probably going deeper, it's probably insecurities on my own part, in my own heart of what will they say? Do they even want to come? I think it stems from that.
So on the feedback from Google Forms, there are 5 things that came up that listed here next. And it's busy schedule, lack of accommodations for children or larger groups, my fear of people becoming uncomfortable to just drop in. I found that quite interesting. You don't want to be hospitable because you're afraid now next time they'll just, okay, let's go to so-and-so's house because we felt welcome there. Distance, fear of people not wanting to come. If you want to pick one of those or anything else, and just give us a word on that. If there's, go ahead.
I also think something that ties into this, or how I grew up, my dad was the hospitable one. He was the one that was at the door that welcoming people, and my mom was the entertainer, more so. I think there's a big difference in between hospitality and entertaining. Entertaining, it's more performance, you gotta have it all right. Hospitality is how you make people feel. So I grew up with that balance. I was blessed with that, honestly. But I also remember a time when Mom would have a lot of quiltings and she would have a lot of coffee breaks. And I distinctly remember when the coffee shops started popping up around town and we started meeting in coffee shops instead of our homes. And I don't know if that plays into it, but just the stop in for a cup of coffee doesn't happen near as much anymore since we do have coffee shops.
And on another aspect of that, as far as the overnight stays, it wasn't that many years ago that when we traveled, we would travel, our routes would be centered around where we would stop for the nights, as far as people's houses or relatives' houses. And it has become a thing that, you know, it's much easier now with the availability of hotels and various Airbnbs and things of that sort, that there are relatives that go to visit their friends, their relatives. They won't even stay at their houses. They'll actually get an Airbnb or a hotel because it's more convenient. And I think we're missing an aspect there as well, because like Maureen was saying, as far as, you know, no longer being in homes or, you know, sitting around the table and talking, we go to the coffee shop, and I think there's an aspect there that we're missing. And I don't know how we necessarily, I don't want to say fight back, but how do we push back at something like that when it's become a culture, and it's much easier. It actually takes more effort on both parties to meet at somebody's house or to stop at somebody's house for the night. But I think that has become a real thing. I remember as a child, you know, going to somebody's house, and I hated it because I didn't know who they were. My parents knew them and whatever, but leaving, I often left with a relationship with a new friend. And so there was relationships that were made that I wouldn't have made otherwise.
I have a question for you. So we were at an event here a couple Saturdays ago, and because of where my wife had already sat down and because of where she sat, I sat next to this guy that I knew, and he is a guy that violated your space. I mean, his face would have been 6 inches of yours whenever he was talking, and he had nothing to say that was of any benefit to me. And I actually sent my wife a text saying, "Can you get me away from here," or whatever. And so my question is it okay to avoid those kinds of situations? Like if here's this guy sitting, I think I'll just move around to another table. Is that unchristian to do that? Anyone?
I really don't have an answer, but I've been in those situations too. And I honestly try to avoid the confrontation if I can. I try to be friendly, but I try to avoid putting myself in a situation where we encounter a similar experience.
Thank you. I'm still a Christian. All right, Linda, how might hospitality look for the mom with young children?
So, as a mom with young children, I can really relate to that. I've often struggled with the balance of mom life and hospitality and trying to fit it into normal life. It can be hard. I think realistically speaking, for us moms, simply the idea of hospitality can sometimes feel a little overwhelming. But I still think it's really important and it's essential. Just to build friendships, to have that connection with other moms, and to feel like, you know, we can commiserate together and find encouragement. And yeah, it can be really, really life-giving and a source of hope even. So yeah, I think it's really good for moms to not become isolated, because that can easily happen. So I have a few ideas that have seemed to work well, or that can. Like play dates. Of course, children are such a great conversation piece. Who doesn't love talking about their kids? And just like the children are building friendships, and that gives you an excuse to get together again. So yeah, I have a few friends that I would say I've built a friendship over our children, and they love being together. Offer to bring coffee to someone's house. If you feel like, oh, my house is a mess, I don't want to have anyone over, it feels overwhelming to clean everything, get the bathroom cleaned, whatever, we're struggling to get the kids dressed, then just text a friend and say, hey, can I bring coffee to the park or to your house? And we can just chill. And most moms, they'll love that. Like, no kidding, I do anyway. So yeah, invite them to other places where you can hang out for free, otherwise. Don't be afraid to initiate. Yeah, most moms love that. Also, it's fine to just have coffee or tea. Like you can say, come to my house, we'll just have coffee, we'll just have tea. You can also grab some biscottis from Walmart or a croissant from East Main. I do that. Caramel rolls for cinnamon rolls from Walnut Creek. It's still fun to be together, light a candle, put on a little music if that helps, and it's just, it can be a really nice, just create a peaceful environment for a mom to find some connection and practice. So if it scares you, just practice a little more, and yeah.
We might have a lot of moms that will be sitting by the telephone this week.
Text me.
Don't just show up, right? Yeah. Are you through?
I mean, I have a few other practical tips. Do we have time? I mean, not that I'm that. Yeah, anyway. So a lot of things that have also worked for me is to, just very practically speaking, is to set yourself up for success, like by having systems and routines. YouTube has so many great ideas. Like if it overwhelms you to keep your house clean, or if it keeps you from having people over because your house isn't clean, there are systems that you can create and routines that really help with that, to just have your main area clean, and that is just, for a mom, I'm sure most of you moms can relate, it just helps so much to actually have people over. If you have things that really intimidate you, like some people might feel scared that it'll be awkward, that they won't have anything to talk about, don't worry about it. It usually flows. Or invite another friend to come. So you have two friends that can sit and visit, and then you can just listen or just serve them. And they can kind of entertain each other, and you don't have to be scared that it'll be awkward or, I think those are most of the things. And also, it's fun to invite more people since the house is clean and the snack is made. So it's like, just join the party, and then you can have kind of grow your pool of friends in that way.
Okay, thank you. Well done. Nevin, we're down to 15 minutes here. How can men show hospitality and be involved?
So that's a good question, because often when we think of hospitality, whether it's inviting guests for Sunday lunch or an overnight stay, we often look at the women as being the primary hospitality givers. When in reality, if you look at it as more of a team effort, I think as a guy, you will be able to enjoy more hospitality, more opportunities, because your wife knows that you're actually going to help her. But some practical tips, as far as some practical things that we can do as men to help when it comes to hosting, is if it's a Sunday lunch, say I'll make the meat, I'll take care of the main dish or something like that. If you enjoy grilling, I have yet to see guests come over that haven't enjoyed a good grilled chicken or whatever it may be. Very few people are going to complain when the man of the house grills some food. Another thing is, whether it's a Saturday before your hosting event, take care of the children, because often that is one of the biggest obstacles for ladies, is they want to work, or they want to get things done, but the children are keeping them from doing that. So take the children outside, and allow your wives to to prepare food or clean the house, whatever it might be. Because sometimes us as men trying to get in the kitchen or clean the house is actually more of an obstacle than than just allowing your wife to do it. So take some distractions away from her to allow her to do her thing. And then there's also the times where there's, it's just gets very emotional and where your wife just needs a hug and say, it'll be okay. Those are things that, it seems simple, but being there to assure them that you'll be there to help. And then when guests do arrive, be the entertainer. Don't disappear, because it's important that is done as well. And so, there's more, but look at yourself as a team, and not as it's the lady's job to do it, because it's important not only for your marriage, but it's also important for the experience and the feeling that the guests get as well when everyone is involved and you're doing your part and you're doing it with an attitude of I want to do this because it's who I am. I have more to add later for another question.
Good. Thank you. I'm going to skip question number 6, and if we have time, we'll come back to it. But Trevor, when I was a teenager, my family lived halfway between here and Florida. We got guests. Overnight gets usually a 2-day trip from here. Many people make it a 2-day trip. We had overnight guests like all the time. When you were in Thailand, did you have some similar situations, and how did you handle like last-minute guests over there? Your mom.
Yeah, so we did quite a bit. I feel like it changed, especially when we moved to Thailand, just in the amount that we hosted. I guess maybe kind of going back earlier, it was never something that came super naturally for us as a family to do so necessarily. We did a fair amount of hosting growing up, and enjoyed it for the most part, but it was always very, very stressful beforehand, like the time leading up for people to come, especially with mom and getting the house ready and everything. So it was a very stressful time. And Dad, unfortunately, was the type to often invite people over without maybe running it by mom right away. There was a time right after they got married that I think it was a Sunday evening service, and he decided to invite some people over afterwards for a snack. And when mom found out, she panics, rightfully so. Apparently we didn't have barely any food at the house. It wasn't cleaned up for guests, but they decided to go ahead with it anyway. They had the people over, and I think they had hot dogs and popcorn, something, just a simple snack. And to this day, those people still talk about how much they enjoyed that evening with them. And I don't think we should be going around inviting people, like has already been covered, without running it by our wives or a spouse. But I think there is something to being spontaneous and flexible in having people over. If we can't have everything ready, if the conditions aren't perfect, we can still provide a warm place that people feel at home at and welcome. And I think, kind of going back to Thailand, I think that really helped us understand that. We hosted a lot more, whether it was guests visiting us from the States or hosting staff and student events. It was pretty common to have 30 or 40 people in our living room, and often without very much notice beforehand. And so I think there's always an element of difficulty with that, but I think what really helped us is realizing that hospitality does take some sacrifice, and it requires all of us to give. If we can't get everything ready, if we can't have, it's not always going to be the most convenient time. And I think we can still control how we treat people and welcome them into our house. And I think something that can help with that is having everyone buy into that, not just our parents or our mom, but also the kids as well. Sometimes we would have to give up our room for a week or two while guests are there. So we would do that. Sometimes with the responsibilities that mom and dad had at IGO, they would be gone for the full day. And so it would be us kids to spend time with the guests and maybe show them around town. So being willing to do that. Is the last part of the question, how can we prepare for last minute guests? I'm not sure if I have a perfect answer for that. The thing that came to mind is to simply start by hosting, by just having people over. You have to start somewhere, and you can start small. It's going to be hard to welcome people into your house if we haven't made a practice of having people over. And I think once we do that, we'll find ourselves more, as we do that, we find ourselves more prepared and even able to enjoy those times as well.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to get to your question, Linda. Pardon me. You grew up in a Hutterite colony.
Yes.
Share with us a few strengths you learned from that community regarding hospitality.
So, as most of you probably know, I grew up in a Hutterite colony. And I would say probably the biggest strength that comes to mind would be, is very much a drop-in culture. What I mean by that is like your doors are open, people don't really, you're not expected to knock when you walk into people's houses because of how the way everyone lives. And you kind of get this sense of, we're family. And I think that actually just really creates a culture of you're always welcome. And I'm not gonna say people always feel like that. I mean, we're all human, but if it's like part of the culture, it really makes a huge difference, I think, in people's mindsets around it and just the way that they think about hospitality and having people in their home. I would have grown up very much with that, like you just, like for women, I was talking about moms earlier, you just have your house kind of tidy most of the time and you're always dressed. So you expect people to walk into your house because it'll probably happen. It's very much a culture of come in and drink coffee and you don't have to be invited. Yeah, definitely not big on huge invitation, like you wait for an invitation, you don't. If you want to go visit, you do. If you want to hang out, you go and hang out.
Thank you. I'd like to piggyback on that. 2 days ago, I had the privilege of having coffee with Tom Moeller down in Florida. And one of the things that he shared, may I share? He grew up in a German Baptist setting, okay? And he said one thing that he's noticed is when we go to each other's homes for lunch, like on a Sunday, we eat and scat, and something like that. But he said in his culture, you stayed for popcorn or whatever, and you might maybe even stayed for supper. So maybe that's something we can learn from. And Janice reminded me that when we were in a German Baptist church in Modesto, California, some years ago, we were invited to someone's house, and we did sit around the table all afternoon. And so, yeah, just a thought. So we're really getting down there now. Some of these have kind of been covered. Like how can hospitality extend beyond the home? What are ways we can be hospitable in everyday interactions at work, in our neighborhoods, or even church? Was a question I was going to assign to Sherry. And then what are some common misconceptions about hospitality that you've encountered? What advice would you give to someone who feels overwhelmed by the idea of hosting others? And I'd like to highlight Trevor's thought there that if hosting feels uncomfortable to you, just start. Just start. I mean, it's kind of like witnessing. If that's uncomfortable, just start. I mean, just open your mouth. God said he would put words in it. And then I think what I'd like to do is open it up for questions or thoughts from you as a congregation. And then if we still have time, we'll come back and touch on some of these. But anything from anyone? Okay, yeah. So, yeah, Terry said that some Sunday nights he doesn't feel like hosting. He thinks maybe next Sunday night he'll feel more like it. Anyone else? So let's go back to Maureen's. I don't want to cut anyone off. If there is anything, just shout it out. We've been guests at numerous homes here, and we've always felt welcome. And I know what it's like, the Sunday afternoon thing about you don't want to fall asleep in someone's easy chair, right? You'd rather go home and do it there. And I like my Sunday afternoon naps, so maybe that's one reason that we kind of take off after lunch. But Maureen, if you would just take us through that. So you've invited people for Sunday lunch. How do you prepare? What are some things you might consider as you prepare? And take us through some of the thought processes. We've been at your house. You're an amazing hostess. And and just a well-appointed place and good food and good fellowship and all that stuff.
Oh, thank you. I don't do it alone. I have amazing children that help. And I have a husband that gets the children to help. So that is a huge benefit. Actually, after Mariah got married, I thought I can't host anymore because usually after church, she heads home and gets the bread in the oven and, takes it on, but I still can. So thought process, I think of who am I having? Are there dietary needs? I remember back in the day, Paul and Barb came down often, and he was always, he couldn't have sugar so I would try and think of, well, what could I have that Paul can still enjoy for dessert? And then I think the thing that I would like to tell the ladies that come from the Amish is, because the thought of fixing a meal and then walking out the door for 3 hours and then coming home and it's supposed to all be hot and perfectly ready to eat, it's like, how do you do that? And if you didn't have to do that, or if you didn't watch your mom do that, well, how do you know how to do that? So, very practical things. I go for food that I can prepare ahead of time. Like if I do poor man's steak, I often mix that Thursday already, and I'll grill it, stick it in the fridge, and then, practical tip, I will bake it in the morning before I leave, and then I just put it on warm so that I don't have to worry about, is it baking when I'm not at home? That's very practical things. The mashed potatoes or whatever, I work ahead and do things that you can put in crock pots or bake and hold. That's huge for me anyway. I just prep food ahead of time. That's thought process for me. Getting the table open, my children do that. And when it comes to taking the table down, my kids do that, or Mark does. Mark is very hands-on. He helps a lot. So that's the thought process. And then also I would say sit with your guests. Your guests will not feel welcome if you're always serving and not actually sitting with them and being present with them. It's how you make them feel.
So one of the things that I thought we might be able to talk about, and we're out of time, so we won't, but hostess gifts. What are some other things that I was thinking? Do you take your shoes off when you go in someone's house? Just there's so many things that we could branch out in if we had the time, but if you don't do that, we take our shoes off in the house, and I think it's just a good response to hospitality, right? And good practice. So, anyone have a quick yes, Nevin?
So just one more comment on as far as this thing. Is this on? There we go. One more comment on preparation. I feel strongly that hospitality or even generosity is a matter of attitude, and how we live our life is how we live our life is how it's going to affect other people. And when we look at hospitality as being an inconvenience or something that we have to do, well, that's how it's going to come across to people that we have in our homes. And so it really comes back to an attitude, and it's we've heard a lot this morning, tips on how we can continue to do it. And if there's an apprehension, like Trevor said, Start small. Invite somebody that you know into your home. And it takes practice. We talked a while back about something, and it just, practice. And so hospitality is a very similar thing. But it starts with our attitude. If we don't want to, then that's going to come across. Heard recently somebody was at a place, and they felt very quickly that the only reason they were there is because, there was an obligation. And, they were invited over, and it didn't feel welcoming. And so, it starts with our attitude.
So I'd like to ask you three ladies a question. If I think this is worth the time. When you have guests, like Sunday lunch or whatever, do you feel like when the meal is over, you want to head to the kitchen and clean up, or do you like to stay sitting and reject the offers of help because you want to fellowship? Which is there? Is there a ditch on both sides, or a happy medium? What are your thoughts on that?
I think there's a time and a place for both, probably. Sunday lunches, it feels like you maybe don't have as much time before people want to go home and give their kids naps or, get to whatever they have to do. And that feels like often maybe the dishes can wait. And that's great. For me, I often would rather just spend time chatting, or maybe if it's a bigger group, you can use paper plates, or, even a smaller group. Like, if that's going to give you more time to make them feel welcome and talk to them, then that's totally worth it, because I think most people don't mind that at all. But then there are times when it's like, maybe you have a few friends over, and it's actually kind of creates just a relaxed environment where you're all working together, and it can be just almost more of an intimate thing for people to see your cupboards and your, like to be in your kitchen and working, and it can make friendships, I think.
Good. Anyone, you have thoughts?
I will say there's nothing like conversation over the kitchen sink. Like, in the past, I've experienced that, and it is, like she said, it can be intimate. It can be, you feel exposed when they go in your cupboards, but, you are who you are, so
Okay.
that's part of it.
Linda, do you have anything to add?
I agree with what you said.
Okay, so everybody's different, right? My wife would much rather just, after everybody's done, she does her thing in the kitchen at her leisure, deals with the leftovers and stuff like that. So I'm all thumbs when it comes to kitchens. For many years, I installed kitchens, but once that's passed, I tend to stay. I did bake a cake one time. But thank you all y'all did a great job. I really appreciate all of your help here, and hope that it was beneficial.